The grand court of the Varn Dominion was built like a circle of stars. Glowing pillars rose high into the air, and the floor shone with shifting lights that seemed to move like living energy. Hundreds of alien eyes watched from the galleries above. They came from many worlds, their shapes strange and their colors bright, but all shared one thought. Today, they would watch a human fall. At the center stood Moran, the only human in the chamber. He wore a plain gray suit, torn at the sleeve, and his face carried marks of exhaustion. Two guards with scaled skin stood behind him, holding long energy rods. Around him floated the high judges of the Dominion, massive creatures with eyes like polished glass and voices that echoed like thunder. They were known for their pride, and none of them had ever shown mercy to a human. "Moran of Earth," said the chief judge, his voice cold and deep. "You are charged with the destruction of the Varn warship Sornuk. The loss of Varn life was great. You are accused of violating Dominion peace law. How do you plead?" Moran lifted his head slowly. His voice was quiet but steady. "I did what I had to do. The Sornuk attacked the human colony. We sent warnings. They ignored them." The judge's face twisted into a strange, sharp smile. "You destroyed a ship of the Dominion. Your kind has no right to challenge us." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some hissed. Others laughed softly. Humans were new to the stars, small, fragile creatures compared to the ancient powers like the Varn. Many in the court believed that humanity had risen too fast and needed to be reminded of its place. Moran stood still, his gaze calm. "If defending innocent lives is a crime, then I'm guilty." A second judge, taller and more severe, leaned forward. "You speak of defense, yet our reports show you fired first." "Because they aimed their cannons first," Moran replied firmly. "You call it law, I call it survival." The chief judge struck the glowing floor with his staff. The light dimmed. "Enough. Humanity's arrogance has gone far enough. We will decide your fate." For a long moment, silence filled the court. The only sound was the faint hum of the energy field around the prisoner's stand. Moran's eyes moved across the crowd. He saw no pity, only contempt. Yet somewhere deep inside him, a spark of calm burned brighter than fear. Finally, the chief judge spoke again. "By the law of the Dominion, the sentence is death, but not a swift one. You will be exiled to Gorgoth, a Class 9 world unlivable, untamable, and final." A wave of reaction swept through the gallery. Gasps, laughter, and even applause. Everyone knew Gorgoth. It was not a prison. It was a graveyard. The planet was covered in violent storms, poisonous air, and creatures that devoured steel. Even the strongest alien species never lasted a day there. The judge's voice carried over the noise. "You will be left there alone. No weapons, no aid. Your life will end quickly, as it should." The guards stepped closer, ready to take him away. But Moran did not resist. He only looked up at the glowing circle above, where light from the stars poured down on him. "You think death is certain," he said quietly. "But humans have a way of surprising the universe." The words echoed through the hall. The judges ignored them, but several spectators paused. Something in his tone steady sure made their laughter fade. As the guards dragged him toward the exit, the court's voice filled the chamber once more. "Sentence confirmed. The human will be sent to Gorgoth immediately." Hours later, Moran sat inside a dark transport ship. Metal walls surrounded him, and the only light came from a small window showing the blackness of space. Two Varn guards sat across from him, their armor reflecting the dim light. Neither spoke. To them, he was already dead. Through the small window, Moran could see Gorgoth in the distance. A swirling planet of red storms and lightning, its surface hidden under thick clouds. It looked alive, dangerous, and endless. He stared at it silently, his mind calm but alert. He thought about Earth, blue oceans, green forests, open skies. He thought of the colony he had protected, of families who had escaped because he refused to retreat. They would never know what happened to him. Maybe they would think he died a hero. Maybe they would forget. But Moran didn't care. What mattered now was survival. He closed his eyes and remembered the old words his grandmother once said. When the world pushes you down, stand up again. That's what it means to be human. The ship shook as it entered Gorgoth's atmosphere. Flames streaked across the window. The guards strapped in. One of them sneered. Enjoy your final moments, human. Moran didn't answer. He was studying the structure of the pod, memorizing every bolt, every piece of metal that might be useful later. He didn't plan to die here. The ship opened its lower hatch. The guards unstrapped him, pushed him into a small drop pod, and sealed the door. A light blinked overhead. 10 seconds to launch. A voice from the control room came through the speaker. Human Moran, you have been sentenced to death by exposure on Gorgoth. No being has ever survived there. Goodbye. Moran smiled faintly. Then I'll be the first. The pod shot downward, flames roaring outside. The force pressed him into his seat. The shaking grew violent. Warning lights blinked red as heat levels spiked. Then came impact hard, crushing. The pod slammed into the ground, bouncing twice before stopping. Smoke filled the air. The control screens went dark. Moran coughed, unfastened his harness, and forced open the hatch. A wave of hot wind hit his face. He stepped outside and saw a world unlike anything he had imagined. The sky was red and black, filled with endless lightning. The ground was cracked and steaming, dotted with strange plants that glowed faintly blue. Far away, massive creatures moved between the rocks, giant shapes with scales that reflected the stormlight. The air smelled of metal, and ash dot the pod scanners blinked weakly. The readings were worse than expected temperature at 70 degrees Celsius, air pressure double that of Earth, and radiation at lethal levels. His suit had limited shielding and oxygen for only a few hours. Moran looked around calmly. He found the wreckage of his drop pod scattered nearby. From it, he salvaged a metal panel and a half-melted survival knife. Not much, but enough to begin. The storm above cracked with a sound like the sky itself breaking. Dust and heat swirled around him, but Moran didn't run. He found a cluster of rocks and used the metal panel to create a small barrier against the wind. Then he dug a shallow trench with his hands, sheltering himself as best he could. The air burned his throat, but he took slow breaths through his filter. All right, he muttered. First goal, survive the night. As the hours passed, the light dimmed and the storm grew quieter. Strange noises echoed in the distance, creatures calling, or perhaps hunting. Moran stayed awake, gripping his knife, eyes scanning the shadows. He was tired, hungry, and alone, but he refused to give in to fear dot above him. Lightning split the clouds again, revealing the stars for a brief moment. He stared at them, remembering the court and the laughter of his judges. He thought about what he told them. I'll come back. Most beings would have seen it as an empty boast. But to Moran, it was a promise, a mission. The universe wanted him dead. The Varn wanted him forgotten. But humans were not made to surrender. They were made to adapt. He whispered softly to himself. You wanted me to die here. Let's see what this world can teach me instead. Far away, something massive moved in the dark, a creature with glowing eyes and a low, rumbling growl. Moran gripped his knife tighter. The night on Gorgoth had begun, and with it began a story that the Varn Dominion would never forget. The story of the first human who walked into death and came back alive. When the first light touched the horizon of Gorgoth, it was not gentle or warm. The sunrise burned red like molten iron. The air shimmered, thick with heat, and the wind carried the sound of distant thunder. For most beings, this world was death. For Moran, it was the beginning. He sat inside a small shelter built from metal pieces of his drop pod. The structure was rough, just enough to block the fierce wind. His oxygen filters blinked red, warning that the air was becoming too toxic to breathe. He opened the metal case beside him, removed the filter module, and examined it. It was cracked and partly melted. He thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "All right, let's fix you," he said to the broken filter, as if it could hear him. He used wire from the ship's controls to seal the crack and place small rock dust over the hole. The dust reacted with the air, forming a thin crust. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. He reattached the filter to his helmet and breathed slowly. The air was harsh but survivable. Outside, the ground trembled. Something big was moving. Moran crouched low and peered through a crack in his shelter. A massive creature walked across the rocks, a beast with 6 legs, dark skin like armor, and glowing blue eyes. Each step it took left a mark that smoked. Its mouth opened, releasing a strange clicking sound that echoed through the valley. Moran stayed still, heart beating fast. The creature sniffed the air and turned its head. For a moment, it looked directly toward his shelter. He held his breath. Then, after a few seconds, it walked away, disappearing behind a wall of dust. Only when it was gone did he let out a slow exhale. He whispered to himself, "So, that's the welcome party." By noon, the heat grew unbearable. The ground burned even through his boots. He wrapped pieces of fabric from the pod seat around his legs for extra protection. The nearest shade was miles away, but he needed food and water before night returned. He scanned the area using a half-broken sensor from the pod. It showed faint energy readings nearby. He followed them, walking carefully between rock spires and steaming vents. Every few minutes, the wind carried bursts of hot air strong enough to push him sideways. He leaned into the gusts, refusing to fall. After an hour of walking, he reached a field of strange plants, tall stalks with transparent leaves that pulsed with light. When he cut one open with his knife, a thick, clear liquid poured out. He dipped a finger, tasted it carefully. It was bitter, but not poisonous. He filled a small container with the liquid and took a slow drink. It burned his throat, but eased his dryness. He smiled faintly. "First drink on Gorgoth," he said. "Not bad." As he collected more liquid, a sound reached his ears, a sharp hiss. He turned fast. From behind the plants crawled a creature the size of a lion, its body covered with shining scales and its eyes glowing green. It moved low to the ground, tail twitching. The creature hissed again, muscles tightening. Moran slowly raised his knife. "Easy now," he whispered, though he knew it couldn't understand. The beast lunged, teeth flashing. Moran rolled aside, barely dodging its jaws. The creature hit the ground, tail whipping toward him. He blocked with his metal panel, the impact sending sparks. He felt the force shake his arm, but didn't drop the shield. He noticed the beast's movement was fast but predictable. It always attacked from the left side. When it lunged again, he stepped right and struck under its neck with his knife. The blade cut deep, and the creature screamed, thrashing wildly. Moran jumped back, watching as it staggered and fell. Steam rose from its wound. After a few moments, it lay still. Breathing hard, Moran stood over the creature. Its blood hissed when it touched the ground. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "You wanted me dead," he muttered. "Now you'll help me live." He used the sharp edge of a rock to remove some of the creature's hide. The material was thick and flexible, strong enough to make armor. He also carved meat from the softer parts of its body. The smell was strong, but he didn't care. It was food. He wrapped the pieces in plant leaves and began walking back toward his shelter. The sky darkened early that evening. A storm was coming. The clouds twisted like giant snakes, flashing with blue lightning. The wind howled across the valley. Moran ran, pulling the hide around him. By the time he reached his shelter, dust and rocks were flying through the air. He pushed inside, sealed the entrance with metal panels, and crouched low. The storm hit like a wave. The walls shook. Sparks lit the sky outside. Each flash made the world bright for a moment, then plunged it into darkness again. The noise was deafening. Yet Moran stayed calm. He remembered the stories of Earth's old sailors who fought storms at sea. They didn't fear the ocean. They learned its rhythm. He would do the same here. During the storm, he cooked a small piece of the creature's meat over a glowing rock that held heat. The smell filled the tiny space. When he tasted it, the flavor was strange, smoky, and sharp, but it gave him strength. He ate slowly, thinking about his next move. When the storm finally passed, he opened the shelter door. The landscape had changed completely. The wind had carved new shapes into the rocks, and deep cracks split the ground. His tracks were gone. Only the faint glow of the plants remained. He stepped outside and looked around. Above him, the stars were clear for the first time since his arrival. He could see them stretching across the sky, silent and endless. Somewhere up there, the Varn Dominion continued their rule. Somewhere far away, Earth still turned in peace. He felt a strange pull between the two, a sense of belonging to both yet owned by neither. He whispered to the stars, "You thought I'd die here, but I'm still standing." Days turned into weeks. Moran learned the rhythm of Gorgoth. He built stronger shelter using stone and creature bones. He discovered that the storms came in cycles. Every 6 days, the winds grew wild, and lightning storms rolled across the land. He learned to prepare before each one, storing food and securing his tools. He made a spear from a long bone and metal shards. He shaped armor from the creature's hide, covering his arms and chest. Each day he explored farther, marking the ground with symbols so he wouldn't lose his way. He found more plants that produced drinkable liquid, and even some that gave off oxygen when burned. But survival was never easy. Gorgoth tested him constantly. Some days, the heat was so strong that the rocks themselves cracked open. Other days, cold mist rolled across the land, freezing everything it touched. Once, he woke to find his shelter surrounded by crawling insects with glowing wings. They ate metal. He barely escaped by lighting fire around the edges. Each danger taught him something new. Each scar reminded him he was still alive. The planet wanted to kill him, but he refused to let it win. One evening, while exploring near a canyon, Moran discovered something unexpected: wreckage. The remains of an old Varn probe half buried in sand. He dug it out and examined it carefully. The probe's outer shell was damaged, but inside he found power cells, wires, and a small energy core still faintly active. He carried the pieces back to his shelter, excitement burning in his chest. With these, he could make tools, maybe even a beacon. For the first time in weeks, hope returned. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly. He used the probe's parts to create a heating unit and a small light that glowed without fuel. He even managed to repair a scanner enough to detect energy signatures nearby. It wasn't much, but it meant progress. He was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to build Dot as he worked. He spoke softly to himself. The Varn wanted me to vanish, but I'm learning. Every day, I learn a little more about this world, and one day, I'll leave it. When night came again, he climbed to the top of a rock ridge and looked out at the storm-lit horizon. The planet roared around him, winds screaming, lightning flashing, but he stood firm, feeling the strength in his legs and arms. His suit was damaged, his body scarred, but his spirit was whole. He raised his face to the sky and whispered, "You called this a Deathworld. To me, it's a teacher." Somewhere deep in the darkness, a giant creature howled in answer. The sound was powerful, wild, alive. Moran smiled. He was no longer afraid of this place. He understood it now. The Deathworld had not broken him. It was shaping him into something stronger down in the quiet after the storm. He returned to his shelter, placed the repaired energy core beside him, and closed his eyes. For the first time since his arrival, he slept peacefully. Tomorrow, he would start building something bigger, a signal, a message to the stars. The Dominion believed no one could survive Gorgoth. Soon, Moran would prove them wrong. The nights on Gorgoth had grown shorter, but they were still filled with sounds that no human should ever hear. The ground breathed with heat, and the sky never rested. Yet in the middle of that wild planet, one man continued to work. Refusing to let the world claim him, Moran sat inside his stone shelter, surrounded by scattered metal parts and dim lights made from glowing stones. His hands were rough and scarred, but his movements were careful and patient. Before him lay the half-repaired Varn probe, now stripped and reshaped into something new. For weeks, he had been turning its remains into a communication device, a small transmitter that might reach the stars. He looked up at the roof of his shelter, listening to the low rumble of thunder outside. Every storm still carried danger, but now he understood their rhythm. Gorgoth's storms always came with power lightning that could charge his devices. He had placed long metal rods outside to gather energy, using them to feed the weak battery cells he had salvaged. Tonight, he was close to finishing. He connected two wires, twisted them tight, and smiled faintly as the small transmitter flickered with life. The soft blue light filled the room. He pressed a button on its side. Static crackled, followed by silence. Almost, he muttered, adjusting the frequency. Come on, don't give up on me now. The static shifted again. This time, a faint tone answered. His heart quickened. The signal was working. It was weak and unstable, but it was real. Moran leaned closer. Let's see if you can talk to the stars. He typed a short message into the control pad. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. The message was simple, yet it carried everything he wanted to say. To the Varn High Court, this is Moran of Earth. You sentenced me to death on Gorgoth. I lived. I am coming back. He pressed the send button. The device hummed softly, sending the signal upward through layers of storm and radiation. He could not know if anyone would hear it. But even if the message never reached the stars, he felt peace knowing he had tried. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the valley below. For a moment, he saw the vastness of Gorgoth, the endless plains, the sharp mountains, and the glowing rivers of molten rock. It was a terrible world, but it had become his home. He had learned its secrets, tamed its dangers, and used its storms to call across the void. Days passed. Moran continued to strengthen the transmitter, building new antennas and adjusting the frequency. He built a tall tower from metal bones and placed his device at its peak. Every storm that passed gave it more power. Every day, he sent the same message. At first, there was no answer. But one night, while he rested beside the weak glow of his fire, a sound came from the transmitter, 3 short beeps. Then silence. Then again, 3 beeps. He froze. Slowly, he stood and walked to the device. The light on its panel was flashing in rhythm. It wasn't random. It was a response. He pressed the button. This is Moran. Identify yourself. For a long moment, there was only static. Then a voice, distant and distorted, but clearly speaking in the Varn language, answered, impossible, identify, source. Gorgoth signal, impossible, Moran smiled. The disbelief in that alien voice was clear, even through the broken transmission. He spoke again, calm and steady. You sent me here to die, but I learned to live. Tell your high court that they're Deathworld. The response was faint but sharp. Human ... cannot survive Gorgoth. This is deception ... He laughed softly. Then come and see. The signal faded into silence once more, but Moran knew it had worked. His message had reached them. Somewhere out there, among the stars, the Dominion was hearing the impossible truth. A human had survived their deadliest world ... back in the Varn capital. Deep within the same hall where Moran had once stood trial, chaos spread. The news of his signal passed through every channel. Technicians confirmed that the message was real, its origin unmistakable. It came directly from Gorgoth's surface. The High Council gathered at once. The chief judge who had sentenced Myran stared at the report in disbelief. No living creature has ever survived there, he said. Not even our strongest soldiers. Another judge whispered, if this is true, if the human is alive, what does it mean for us? The room fell silent. The Varn had long believed themselves superior to all other races. Gorgoth was their symbol of power, a place that proved no one could defy their rule. But now, a single human had done what none of them could. The chief judge stood slowly. Send a patrol ship. Verify the truth. Back on Gorgoth, Moran didn't know about the meeting or the fear his signal had caused. He only knew that something had changed. The storm seemed calmer, or perhaps he had grown stronger. The creatures no longer frightened him. He had learned how to move among them, how to hunt and hide. He walked through the valleys with steady steps, wearing armor made of beast hide and metal shards. His body had changed. His muscles were harder, his senses sharper. The planet had tested him in every way, and he had adapted to all of it. One day, as he climbed a rocky ridge, he saw something new in the sky, a bright light, not lightning, moving fast and steady. It wasn't natural. It was a ship . He watched silently, eyes following its path as it descended through the clouds. It landed far away, near the plains he called the Field of Storms. Dust rose high into the air. They came, he said softly. Faster than I expected. He hurried back to his shelter and checked his gear. His spear, his knife, his armor, all ready. He didn't know if they came to rescue him or to finish the job they started. Either way, he would face them on his feet. By the next morning, Moran reached the plains. The air there was hot and heavy, the ground glowing with slow rivers of lava. In the distance stood the Varn patrol ship, its silver hull reflecting the light. Around it, 3 figures in protective suits were moving, scanning the ground. Myran walked toward them slowly. The wind blew dust around his feet. One of the Varn turned, raising a weapon, but then froze. Through the visor, the alien saw something it could not believe, a human, alive, standing tall in armor made from the creatures of Gorgoth. The human's face was marked with scars, his eyes calm and clear. Moran raised a hand. You found me. The Varn leader hesitated, lowering the weapon slightly. Impossible, he muttered. No human could live here. Moran smiled faintly. Then maybe I'm something new. The 3 aliens exchanged uncertain looks. The leader stepped forward. The High Court sent us to confirm your message. Now you have your answer, Moran said. Tell them it's true. The Varn looked around, scanning the wasteland. How did you survive this place? Moran looked up at the storming sky. I didn't just survive. I learned. This planet doesn't forgive weakness. It forces strength. That's what humans do. We adapt. The leader's eyes narrowed. You should have been dead within hours. I almost was, Moran admitted. But every time Gorgoth tried to kill me, it taught me something instead. You call it a death world. To me, it's a teacher. The alien said nothing for a moment, then gestured toward the ship. The council will want to see you. We are ordered to return you to the capital. Moran looked at the ship, then at the horizon. All right, let's go show your judges what a human can do. As the patrol ship rose from Gorgoth's surface, Moran watched the planet shrink below. He felt no fear. Gorgoth had become part of him now, its storms, its heat, its lessons. He was no longer the man who had stood trembling before the Varn court. He had been reforged by the planet itself. When the ship left the atmosphere, he saw the stars once more. They were brighter than he remembered. Somewhere among them waited the same judges who had laughed as they sent him to die. He smiled quietly. I told you I'd come back. The Varn crew glanced at him nervously, whispering to each other in low voices. They had seen soldiers break under far less than what this human had endured. Yet this man sat calmly, eyes sharp, his voice steady. There was something unshakable about him, something they could not understand. Hours later, the patrol ship entered hyperspace. The stars stretched into long lines, and the view outside turned into a sea of light. Moran leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and let out a slow breath. His mission was not over. The hardest part was yet to come, because when he returned to the Varn capital, he would not come as a prisoner. He would come as the proof that humanity could endure anything, that even on the deadliest world in the galaxy, a human could walk, fight, and live. And when the Varn saw him again, they would finally understand what it meant to face a human who refused to die. The Varn patrol ship drifted through the dark of space, silent and tense. The alien crew avoided looking directly at Moran. Some stared at him from afar, whispering quietly, unsure if he was human or something else entirely. The man who had survived Gorgoth no longer looked like the same being they had once judged weak. His face was marked with faint scars, his body lean and strong, and his eyes calm but deep seemed to carry the wildness of that deadly world inside them. The leader of the patrol ship, a tall Varn named Sareth, stood near the control panel. We have entered Dominion space, he said, his voice tight. The council is waiting. Moran simply nodded. He sat near the window, watching the endless field of stars. They didn't expect me to return, he said softly. They thought Gorgoth would finish the job for them. Sareth hesitated. It was not personal. The law is clear. No being who kills a Varn soldier escapes judgment. Moran turned his head slightly. And what law allows a people to send someone to die for defending their home? The alien didn't answer. He looked away, pretending to study the flight screen. The silence in the cabin stretched for a long time. The other Varn worked nervously, occasionally glancing at the human. Moran didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His very presence spoke louder than words. Hours later, the ship approached the glowing planet of Varn Prime, home of the Dominion's capital. From space, the world looked peaceful. Oceans of green crystal, floating cities of light, and towers stretching like spires toward the stars. It was a world built on power and pride. When they landed, the entire docking bay was surrounded by guards. Dozens of officials waited near the ramp, their faces tense. Among them stood several high judges, the same ones who had sentenced Moran to die as the ramp opened. The air of Varn Prime flowed in cool and sharp. Moran stepped down slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. The aliens parted before him, unsure whether to treat him as a prisoner or something more. The chief judge, an old being with silver scales and deep red eyes, stepped forward. Human Moran, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. You were sentenced to death on Gorgoth. No life form has ever returned from that world. How are you alive? Moran met his gaze calmly. Because I refused to die. The crowd whispered among themselves. The chief judge's expression hardened. You mock our judgment? No, Moran said. I honor it. You set me to your hardest test, and I passed. The judge looked at him for a long time, then gestured toward the great court tower. Very well. You will speak before the High Council. They will decide what your return means. The great court looked just as Moran remembered: tall pillars of glass, glowing floors, and endless alien eyes staring from the shadows above. But this time, he wasn't chained or guarded. He walked alone into the center of the hall, his head held high. The judges floated in a circle around him, their robes flickering with colors that shifted like water. The air was filled with tension. Even the smallest sound echoed. The chief judge began. "Moran of Earth, you stand again before the Dominion's court. You were sentenced to die, yet you return alive. Explain yourself." Moran looked around the chamber, taking in the sight of the same beings who once laughed at him. "You call Gorgoth a Deathworld," he said. "But to me, it became something else. It taught me what strength truly means. Not the strength of weapons or machines, but the strength to stand when everything around you wants you to fall." Another judge leaned forward, eyes narrow. "You speak of strength as if it excuses your crime." Moran turned toward him. "You call it a crime to defend innocent lives. But when your warship fired on a human colony, what did you expect me to do? Wait for death? That's not in our nature. Humans fight for life." The judge's eyes flickered, showing brief unease. "Still, you destroyed a Dominion vessel." "I destroyed a threat," Moran replied firmly. "And I paid for it. You sent me to die, but instead, I learned to live." The hall was silent again. The aliens shifted uncomfortably. There was something unsettling in the way Moran spoke, not loud or angry, but with quiet certainty. It was the voice of someone who had looked death in the eyes and no longer feared it. The chief judge broke the silence. "Describe this." "Learning. How does one survive Gorgoth? Our best soldiers have failed there." Moran looked up at the glowing ceiling. "At first, I thought I wouldn't last a day. The storms burned the sky. The air itself tried to kill me. But I learned. I found shelter, made tools from wreckage, built weapons from the bones of the creatures that hunted me. Every time the planet tried to end me, I found a way to use it instead." He paused, remembering the endless storms, the glowing plants, the creatures with blue eyes. "Gorgoth doesn't forgive weakness. It forces you to grow stronger or die. Maybe that's what humans were made for, to adapt to whatever world we're given." The chamber remained silent for a moment, then soft murmurs began among the judges. One of them said, "He speaks of adaptation. Is that not what we value in evolution?" Another whispered, "It is unnatural. A human should not have survived." The chief judge raised his staff, silencing the voices. "Enough. The fact remains that he lives. That alone demands an answer." He turned back to Moran. "You sent a message to the Dominion, declaring that you would return. Was that a threat?" Moran shook his head. "It was a promise. You wanted proof of what humans are. Now you have it." The judge's eyes glowed faintly. "And what are humans, then?" Moran took a slow breath, his voice calm but strong. "We are the ones who don't give up. You can throw us into the fire, into the storm, into the coldest dark, and we'll still find a way to walk out. Not because we're powerful, but because we're stubborn enough to keep trying." The words echoed across the chamber. Some judges looked thoughtful. Others looked afraid. Outside the court, the news spread fast. Across the Dominion cities, screens displayed the image of the human who had survived Gorgoth. Species from across the stars watched and listened. Many had always believed humans were weak, soft creatures of comfort and safety. Now they saw something else entirely. The Dominion's military council gathered that night. Reports flooded in from different sectors, talk of unrest, of other species questioning Varn authority. Some said the Varn were no longer the strongest. After all, they had been defied by a single man from a small blue planet. Back in his chamber, the chief judge stared out at the city lights. He had built his life on the belief that strength came from control. But the human had shown a different kind of power, one that came from will. It disturbed him more than he cared to admit. The next day, Moran was summoned again. The court chamber was filled with even more spectators this time. Diplomats, soldiers, scholars all wanted to see the man who defied death. The chief judge addressed him. After much discussion, the council has reached a decision. You will not be executed again. You will be released under special status as a representative of your species. Your survival is recognized as an exceptional act of will. Moran looked at the judge calmly. So, the sentence is gone? The judge nodded slowly. Yes, but understand this. Human, you have changed how the Dominion sees your kind. Some fear you. Others respect you. Either way, you will be watched. Moran smiled faintly. That's fine. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to make sure you remember what humans can do. He turned, walking toward the exit. The hall was silent, all eyes on him. At the door, he stopped and looked back. You called Gorgoth a Deathworld, he said softly. To me, it was a mirror. It showed me what humans really are. Then he left. Outside, the air of Varn Prime was cool and clear. The twin suns were rising, lighting the crystal towers in gold. Moran stood for a moment, feeling the warmth on his skin. For the first time in months, he breathed clean air. Yet he knew that part of him would always belong to Gorgoth now. The storms had become part of his soul. A small ship waited for him at the edge of the landing platform. A young Varn officer approached and saluted awkwardly. The council has arranged transport. You are free to return to human space. Moran nodded. Thank you. As he boarded the ship, he glanced back at the capital one last time. The towers gleamed, proud and perfect. But beneath that perfection, he sensed change. The Dominion's pride had cracked. Fear had entered their hearts, not fear of war, but fear of something deeper. The knowledge that humans could survive anything. He sat by the window as the ship lifted off. The planet below grew smaller. They think I'm just one man, he whispered. But soon they'll understand there are billions of us. He closed his eyes, hearing the faint hum of the engines, and smiled. He had faced death, faced judgment, faced an entire world and won. He was no longer just Moran of Earth, thought he was Moran of Gorgoth, the man who lived where no one could live, the human who made the impossible possible. And when the stars filled the window once again, he whispered softly to himself, they sent me to die. Instead, I became their lesson. That lesson would soon spread beyond the Varn Dominion. Across the galaxy, stories of the human from Gorgoth would be told and retold. Some would call him a legend. Others would call him a warning. But all would remember the same truth. Humans do not break. They adapt. They endure. And they always come back. The stars stretched endlessly before Moran's ship as it moved away from Varn Prime. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin, a sound that reminded him of peace after months of struggle. Yet his mind was far from silent. His return had changed more than just his fate. It had shaken the beliefs of an entire empire as he looked out at the vastness of space. He could not help but wonder what awaited him now. The Dominion had released him, but their eyes were everywhere. He knew they would not forget him so easily. Still, he had achieved what no one thought possible. He had survived the Deathworld, faced his judges, and walked away free. For a while, Moran sat in silence, watching the stars drift by. Then, a small light blinked on the ship's console, a communication signal. He pressed it, and the face of a young human officer appeared on the screen. Captain Moran, the officer said, his voice trembling with excitement. You're alive. The entire Terran fleet thought you were gone. Moran smiled faintly. Seems the universe doesn't get rid of me that easily. The officer laughed nervously. "The Council on Earth wants to speak with you immediately. Your story has spread everywhere. Even the outer colonies are talking about the man from Gorgoth." Moran leaned back in his seat. "Then it's time I returned home." Days later, his small ship entered Earth's orbit. The blue and green world filled his window, so peaceful, so different from the savage beauty of Gorgoth. The sight brought a strange feeling to his chest. He had dreamed of this moment through storms and endless nights. Now that it had come, he wasn't sure how to feel. He landed at a spaceport outside Geneva, where hundreds of people had gathered to see him. As he stepped down the ramp, a wave of cheers filled the air. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and soldiers saluted. Moran raised a hand in quiet greeting, but his eyes stayed humble. He didn't feel like a hero, only a survivor. A group of officers escorted him to the Terran Council chamber. The large hall gleamed with white light and glass walls showing Earth's skyline beyond. Inside, 12 council members sat waiting. The oldest, Chairwoman Arlen, rose as he entered. "Moran of Earth," she said warmly. "Welcome home. You have done something no one in history has ever done. The entire galaxy speaks your name." Moran bowed slightly. "I didn't do it for fame, Counselor. I just wanted to live." Arlen smiled. "That is exactly why your story matters." As they spoke, Moran told the Council everything. The storms of Gorgoth, the beasts that hunted him, the strange life forms that glowed in the dark, and the lessons the planet had taught him. The members listened in silence, captivated by his calm voice. He didn't exaggerate or dramatize. He simply told the truth, and the truth was powerful enough. When he finished, one of the younger counselors asked, "Do you believe the Dominion will act against us now that you've embarrassed them?" Moran thought for a moment. "Maybe not right away, but they'll never see us the same way again. They thought humans were soft. Now they know what we really are." Chairwoman Arlen nodded. "And what are we, Captain?" He met her eyes. "We're the ones who don't quit. That's our strength." The council chamber fell silent. Then Arlen said quietly, "Perhaps that's what the galaxy needed to see." News of Moran's survival spread faster than light. Across hundreds of worlds, beings of every kind spoke of the human who had conquered a death world. Some saw him as a hero. Others saw him as a threat. But all agreed on one thing: humans could no longer be ignored. On frontier planets, where humans lived beside alien settlers, old prejudices began to fade. Miners, traders, and farmers wore small patches with the symbol of Gorgoth, a black storm over a red sun. It became a mark of pride, a reminder that humanity's strength came not from dominance, but from survival. Moran watched this change from afar. He didn't seek attention, but everywhere he went, people wanted to see him. Soldiers saluted him. Children followed him, asking questions about the monsters he had fought. He answered them kindly, never speaking of the worst days, only of what he learned. One day, while visiting a colony on Mars, an alien merchant approached him. The merchant species had once served under the Dominion. He bowed deeply and said, "Your people have changed how the stars see us. The Dominion feared only power, but now they fear courage. You showed them that courage can be stronger." Moran smiled and shook the alien's hand. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," he said. "It's about standing anyway." But peace did not come easily. In the months that followed, the Dominion began to tighten its control on nearby systems. Rumors spread of fleets preparing for war. They did not openly attack, but they sent warnings, messages filled with veiled threats. The message was clear. Humanity had stepped too far. The Terran Council called for a meeting of defense leaders, and Moran was invited. He sat quietly as admirals and generals argued about fleets, weapons, and alliances. Finally, when the room fell silent, he spoke. Fighting them head-on won't work, he said. They've ruled through fear for centuries. If we want to survive, we can't just show strength. We have to show something they don't understand. And what's that? One admiral asked. Hope, Moran replied. They control others by making them believe resistance is useless. But if we show the galaxy that humans don't break, that even a single human can change everything, others will rise too. The room went silent again. Chairwoman Arlen nodded slowly. Then your survival becomes more than a story. It becomes a symbol. Moran looked down at his hands. Maybe that's what it was always meant to be. Soon, human ships began exploring deeper into space, not for conquest, but for connection. They visited worlds once too afraid to defy the Dominion, offering trade, knowledge, and friendship. Everywhere they went, they carried Myren's story. And everywhere, people listened, on one distant world. A group of alien miners hung a small metal plaque that read, "If one human can survive a Deathworld, then so can we." The idea spread like a spark through dry grass. Planets that had once submitted to the Dominion began to whisper of freedom. The word human became more than a name. It became a reminder that no chain was unbreakable. Myran, though, stayed humble. He lived quietly, far from politics, working with young explorers who wanted to learn survival. He taught them how to endure, how to think, and how to adapt. He told them that every challenge was a lesson, every failure a teacher. One evening, as the sun set over Mars's red horizon, a young cadet asked him, "Captain, after all you've done, do you ever regret going to Gorgoth?" Moran smiled faintly. "At first, I did. I thought it had taken everything from me. But now I see it gave me something I never had before." "What's that?" the cadet asked. "Purpose," Moran said. "It showed me what humans can be." Years passed. Moran grew older, his hair turning silver. Yet his legend only grew stronger. His story was taught in schools, studied in academies, and remembered in songs. On the anniversary of his return from Gorgoth, people across the galaxy lit small lights in his honor, symbols of endurance shining in the dark. Even within the Dominion, quiet change began. Some Varn scholars began questioning the old beliefs of superiority. A few brave voices even admitted that perhaps the human had shown them something valuable: the strength to endure, the will to live beyond fear. One evening, long after Moran had retired, a message arrived from Varn Prime. It was from Sereth, the patrol leader who had once brought him back for judgment. The message was short but sincere. "Moran of Earth, the Dominion remembers. Your words changed more than our laws. They changed our hearts. Some of us no longer see humans as weak. We see them as the example we failed to follow." Moran read the message in silence, then smiled. "Then maybe," he said softly, "the lesson finally reached them." Years later, when his time came, Moran passed peacefully on a quiet outpost near the edge of human space. No grand ceremony, no empire around him, just stars outside the window, and the endless hum of the universe. But across the galaxy, his name lived on. On every world where beings fought to survive, they spoke of the man who faced a death world and lived. They spoke of the human who returned not with vengeance, but with wisdom. And they remembered his simple truth, that no matter how dark the night becomes, there will always be someone who refuses to stop walking forward. And so, the story of Myron of Gorgoth became more than history. It became a belief. A belief that humanity, fragile yet unbroken, could turn even death itself into a teacher. The galaxy had learned something the Dominion had never understood. Humans were not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most advanced, but they were the ones who never stopped trying. And in the endless cold of the stars, that made them unstoppable.